Hello, everyone. My name is Moshe Nave from the SAP Community team. Today we have with us Christophe Schubert and Alex Dumont, developers for SAP Cloud SDK. Before we start the call, just if you have any questions during the presentation, you have the Q&A tab. Feel free to post your questions there, and they will be answered at the end of the call. So Alex and Christoph, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here on this presentation. Yeah, Henning is also probably somewhere listening. And I'd like to welcome you everyone to the SAP Cloud SDK community call. It's the third one of this year. And fortunately, it's also for the version 3 of the SAP Cloud SDK for Java. So we have achieved lots of new features, lots of new stuff, and you'll find out. And I think it's a great opportunity to show you what has happened. Okay. Of course, we have a usual disclaimer. I think you're all aware what's happening here. Okay, so now let's get to the agenda. So at first, we will learn about what's new in the SAP Cloud SDK environment. So all the new releases and new versions of the Java releases and the JavaScript release of the Cloud SDK, as well as some pipeline changes. After that, we will spend probably most of the time in showcasing and explaining the new features and the great new changes to the Cloud SDK for Java. What is it's main point of this meeting, and as well as I will try my best to show you some live demonstration of how to migrate the Java application from version 2 to version 3 of the SAP Cloud SDK being used. After that, we have a dedicated slot for questions and answers, and we will try to resolve any questions which are open and see. Good. Now, before we go into too many technical details, let's see what's happened to the Cloud SDK community. Obviously, we have a new version 3, a major version 3 of the Java Cloud SDK, and also 2 additional minor releases with feature patches and great new stuff. And interestingly, probably for you, is that we also try to keep version 2 up to date, and we are adding, of course, security patches and bug fixes to the version 2 as well, so that the time it will take to migrate a partner application from 2 to 3 to keep it stable and secure. So what's happened? We have had some update to the OData and message VDM to the newest version of the SAP Cloud. And also a very big point is we added for the latest minor patch interesting some cool asynchronous resilient execution. So if you execute a resilient operation, you can now also schedule it and have this run in parallel with other stuff on your application. Also, we are doing our best to update all our tutorials to the version 3. So we have so many material out there for version 2. It will be an ongoing process, you'll find out. So we still have some great migration guide already. And most of the first tutorials are also in good shape for version 3. So yeah, take a look and you will find out what's happening here. Now let's go to JavaScript as well. Here we have some releases of the version 1.8. And what changes is similar. So we have some update to the OData and message VDM. And this time also the possibility to create a new OData entity if there's already an entity you have connected to a system. So it's similar to a creation of a runtime. You can see it as a deep create property. Yeah. Also, you can now retrieve destinations from subscribers as well as provider accounts. So big step up here. For the continuous delivery toolkit, we have version 23 now, and we are supporting now the substitution of credentials and MTA extension files, as well as updated quality checks to version 3 of the Cloud SDK. So of course, we're still updating and keeping all security related changes in best condition and best practice we can. Cool. Now, if you're interested in finding out more, you can visit us at the TechEd this year, obviously. So on one hand, you can find some interesting blog posts with lists some sessions for TechEd 2019, as well as all sessions in Las Vegas, Barcelona, and Bangalore. And it's the interesting topics we cover. And we will be happy to see you there and to have you know the story and the people behind us and our team. Now let's get to the actual SAP Cloud SDK. That's what you're probably been waiting for. And there I have Christoph on my side who will give you a cool presentation.
Okay. Then, yeah, also hello from my side. And yeah, so let's jump right into now first the basically theoretical details, so a bit, slides with code on them, with followed in the end by Alex again, who will then show you some on a live migration of an example project. So yeah, so first a quick overview. So what do we have in general? What did we want to achieve? The main goal was, or one of the main goals was, to broaden our scope. So in the past, we were also called, or we were the S4HANA Cloud SDK. So we now dropped the S4HANA to basically be the SAP Cloud SDK in general, so that in the future we support many more services, especially on Cloud Foundry. And we made it in the same sense also, or in the same direction, also easier for internal contributions, meaning in the end for you as an end consumer of the SDK that you can basically already wait for the first or for more integration with SAP products in general, as we want to facilitate that in the ongoing future. Then probably the most breaking or most noticeable change in the beginning is that we adapted our group IDs and artifact IDs to be more reflective of what the actual usage is. As I just said, we dropped the S4HANA. We also dropped it in our group IDs, meaning we are now can now be found at SAP Cloud SDK. And the S4HANA is only present in cases where it's necessary. So for example, in our S4HANA VDM that we generate and publish. Then in general, as you are probably aware, if you use version 2 of our SDK, is that we had some assumptions about your application or the setup, which if they are not met, that will then result in some exceptions. So what we try to achieve now with version 3 is following the mindset of, it just works, so that that your application runs out of the box and adapts basically to your setup as good as possible, at least. That's, the mindset we have with most of our changes in mind there. And then what we also had, or what we also adapted, is that it's now easier to adapt or add your custom logic into your application using the SAP Cloud SDK. For example, that will take a major part here, the new destination concept that we introduced. This will allow you to not only retrieve them from wherever you want, but also to create them at runtime if it suits your needs for whatever reason. So we are way more flexible in that sense, and that is basically visible everywhere with every accessor and everything that we provide. And also we use the time also to basically remove stuff that is not needed, that was deprecated for several releases. So yeah, and also as mentioned, we streamlined many of our API endpoints in terms especially of using the option keyword or the option object of waiver that is now streamlined, used everywhere where possible. So yeah, that's for the general overview. Coming now to the already mentioned destination concept. There we start with basically what you always saw when you work with destinations and the S4HANA VDM was that you always needed some ERP config context which wrapped a destination name that you only provided. This is now completely dropped. What you have now is you can instantiate, or you have to create your destination or retrieve it manually beforehand, but then you have basically everything in hand. You can do with the destination what you want, wrap it in whatever you want, and pass it on then into the S/4HANA VDM as an example use case. And the ERP config context is now gone. With that, also if you went through our blog post on that, you found the ERP query endpoint as the default destination name that we always used. This is with that also gone. If you provide a destination, or if you want to retrieve a destination, you always have to provide a destination name from now on. So no implicit knowledge there anymore. Everything is explicit in your code then. And you see where you retrieve the destination from, or with which name. Then also in the past, what I also mentioned earlier is that you had basically static sources of your destination. So for example, on Cloud Foundry, you had the destination service, or you used the environment variable, but that was everything rather fixed. What is now possible, and what will also be extended in the future, is that you have the possibility to retrieve destinations from SAP features like the extension factory. And this can easily be adapted, as we can see in the code example that we have below. So as you can see with my cursor here right now, the usual approach, so maybe start at the top, is if you want to retrieve a destination, is go to the destination accessor and retrieve the destination. By default, the behavior is that it uses the environment variable as a first resort, or as a first place to search for a destination. Then it looks for anything that you basically retrieve via your dependencies that you have as modules in your class path. If you have, for example, the SCP CF connectivity module in there, then you will automatically load the destination loader for the Cloud Foundry platform. And then it will look in there. And if it then doesn't find anything, then this will throw an exception. If you are not eager to catch any exception and want to have it more in a functional approach, we are now heavily embracing waiver in the SDK in general. And this can also be directly seen here. We have a try get destination method on our destination accessor, which provides you the option to, or which then returns a try object containing a destination, which will not directly throw any exception. But you can then, on this maybe destination, as I called it here, you can then verify whether it's a success or not, and depending on this, then handle the exception as you see fit. Or if you still want to throw an exception, just call .get on it, and you will anyway throw the exception that it might contain. So that's the usual direct approaches using the fallback mechanism we described before. If you want to adjust this fallback mechanism I described before, for example, as mentioned earlier, you want to retrieve destinations via the extension factory, then you could use a custom loader that I provided, or that I prepared here. So there you have the destination loader chain, which, as a name basically already described, is a chain of destination loaders, meaning it looks in the first provided loader for a destination. If it doesn't find anything, it will look into the next. If it still doesn't find anything, it will go to the third. In this concrete example, we still look first in the environment variable, then in the default Cloud Foundry destination service. And last, if we still have no destination, then we look for the extension factory. So with that, you're relatively flexible to determine or to say where you want to have your destination read. On the other hand, if you directly know where you want a destination from, for example, you want to have it from the extension factory, you could just use in this example, this SCP XF destination loader directly, call any method on there to retrieve the destination manually. Probable or the downside that this might cause is that it's not, that your code is not directly interchangeable between Neo and Cloud Foundry. But that's that so far for how to retrieve destinations. Then, what I already said, it's possible for you to create destinations on the fly if you need it. So this would look something, here again. So the first call is the usual retrieval of a destination via the destination accessor. Our second approach would be to use one of our builders to basically reference the URL for your HTTP destination or for the destination that you represent directly, pass it in, and then use the destination as you see fit. Or if that doesn't suit your needs, you're also free to implement the interface, which is rather slim in comparison, and yeah, should work directly out of the box. And as we already saw before, rather slim, we saw those is and as RFC as well as HTTP methods. Those can now be or are then used to make the destination basically behave, or from an API point of view, from an interface point of view, behave the way that we expect them to be to do. So, for example, if you want to use the S/4HANA VDM, the execute methods that you're all aware of there all require now no longer a destination name as before, or nothing with the default name, but now expect an HTTP destination. As you saw before, if I switch it back, what you retrieve basically from our destination accessor is a plain destination. So now how do you map it from a destination to an HTTP destination? Yeah, for that, you have those as HTTP methods, as well as a check beforehand an is HTTP method to check whether the destination you have at hand actually is an HTTP destination or not. So that's the case for the SRC, and the same way there. Yeah, so far for the direct conversion. For example, our BAPI method or our BAPI query method that we have there only expect a destination, as they contain some special logic to determine whether it should be used as an RFC destination or an HTTP destination. So yeah, in the end, our interface shows which destination we expect, and then you have to or can call everything adjusting accordingly. Another point that's also possible from the interface itself is you can easily decorate the destination with some other destination providing additional features. So for example, if you want to have ERP specific behaviors, so for example, you want to have the subclient and the locale handled automatically, you can and should decorate your destination with the default ERP HTTP destination or HTTP destination, which will then automatically handle the subclient and stuff for you. Yeah, we made this more or less deliberate choice there directly to not have our core code, which is only the HTTP code, not, let's call it, not polluted, but influenced by any S/4HANA specific code. So we directly extracted everything there, and yeah, make it that way again more explicit what needs to be, what is done in your code there. So on the other hand, if you want to have Cloud Platform specific destinations, for whatever reason, if you see any problems there, we also provide Builder for that. So the default one should be good for, I would say, 99% of use cases. But if you have something very concrete and something special, you might want to have a specific, depending on your cloud platform, a Cloud Foundry destination, for example, then you would be free to use the SAP CF HTTP destination and the Builder in there to create what you want. But again, usually the default destination should be good enough, at least for the first approach or for the first task. So with that, we switch over to the next topic, being resilience and caching. As you are aware, in the end, that Hystrix is not maintained anymore, and therefore we switch to the successor being resilience for J, as basically recommended by the Hystrix guys. And in the end, basically the feature set is mostly the same. So we still have the fault tolerance with different features there, like the time limiter, circuit breaker, and so on, as well as the possibility to have performance optimization in form of caching there. So nothing new there. In general, however, the approach they used is very much new. So what they expect now is some form of resilience configuration. And they make it possible to replace, or they basically play along with the JCache Java library there, or Java interface, better said, so that you can provide your own implementation or the implementation you want to use for that. So, for example, Caffeine and Redis, which then implement this interface against which his resilience for J basically implements. Yeah, in general, very customizable, as well as now the big point, the changed API, and that we will see in the next slides. So what we also worked around that to have a bit more, if you want to change, for example, the framework in the future, if Resilience for J is not supported anymore. So we provided a resilience middle layer in between, which under the hood by default would use Resilience for J or should use. But if you want to have your own, or in the future, we provide another option there, another framework, you could directly replace it. And yeah, this middle layer now looks like that. You have the resilience decorator again as a static class, or basically a class containing static methods, into which you can then provide lambdas. In this case, for example, suppliers. If you have a return value and callable, if you don't throw exceptions and a callable, if you throw exceptions, which in the end return again a supplier and callable. So nothing changes there, but the behavior changes very much, meaning that depending on the resilience configuration that you pass in, your call will now be resilient and, depending on the configuration, also cached. So everything is now done more on a method level. It's no longer necessary to provide any commands or to implement any commands. There is no inheritance anymore necessary. So yeah, in that sense, much more functional in that approach. And yeah, so how do we create such a resilience configuration? For that, we have this quick example here. In the end, we have default values, which we'll see in a second, which are loaded which are used if you use the resilience configuration of some identifier. This identifier can be a class object or some string that you decide on. In the end, everything in this resilience configuration is then reused. Be aware there, word of caution, also will say that later again, if you use some caching configuration as part of your resilience configuration, also this is then reused by this identifier. But again, more on that later, just a word of caution there regarding your identifiers. And then, yeah, you can create this configuration basically statically in a class where you want to use it, and then reuse it for every decoration call that you want to have the same resilience properties, basically. And this would then look like here with the lambda expression. Yeah, so far for that. Then we have also the possibility to execute it directly. So here you see you have the execute callable, which retrieves for example, some OData VDM call getting all items. This will then return directly the list of all those items. Basically, this is then a synchronous call. It will block until it's done and it's through. The other approach would be, which is the more recommended approach, to use futures for that, so that basically if you have multiple calls against systems, that you can run those in parallel, and then in the end make this call here, the Q callable, is a non-blocking call in that sense. So you retrieve the future, and afterwards you can then call items.get on this. This is then the blocking point, after which you will have your list of items. But yeah, again, if you have multiple calls like that, you can run them in parallel and have some performance improvement there. Okay, now up to the configuration itself. If you want to provide some or the other way around. What you see here are the default values that we have for the different configuration, as well as that's also the way that you would provide your own configuration if you wanted to. So for example, if you say, okay, time limit of 60 seconds for my system is not good enough, I need 5 minutes, for example, then you could easily use the code that you see here. So basically passing into your resilience configuration a time limiter configuration, which will then get a duration of minute 5 in this example, and will then work with this configuration. That's all the way through, also for the circuit breaker, the bulkhead, basically everything. And yeah, makes it rather readable in the end where the configuration is coming from, how in the end your resilience is configured. Yeah, right here. Also a special word, special mention regarding our goal to make it just work. We, in many places of the SDK, have switched switched our internal expectations, as I already said earlier. So in the past, in version 2, we expected to be in certain cases that a tenant is always there and sometimes a user also or not, depending on where the specific code is mentioned. And depending, and then if one of those assumptions was not met, it just threw an exception. What we did now internally is basically expecting everywhere that a tenant and user is optional. So if it's there, then it's used for resilience and caching. If it's not there, then we don't use it. So it really depends on the configuration of your application there. And this also can be directly used and seen by you here if you use the resilience configuration. And yeah, there you have the options that are available to you. Okay, so just a quick side note on that. Then also what I did not mention yet, Hystrix had the possibility to override a method get fallback or something like that in that regard. This is no longer directly possible, of course, but what is possible in those execute callable, for example, execute callable methods, we have an overridden variant which expects a final, basically function which maps to the exception that was thrown by the actual call. So, and which can then map to the fallback solution that should be returned. So for example, you want to have a list anyway out of it, then you could say, okay, I want to have an empty list in case that anything went wrong. So you can be sure afterwards that this items list in before here has no, will always be a list at least, even if an empty list, but never null. You can achieve, looking into basically our usage of waiver here at this point, that you could also use the tri-monad of waiver directly, so that you just say, okay, you have your callable that you want to have executed, and in the failure case, you can just throw, log a warning in that case, and afterwards, if there is still no list, you can just say, or if there was no list from the beginning, you can just say, okay, I want to return this empty list. So what you see below, those 3 lines behave the same as the fallback that we have here in our execute callable as a last parameter. So in the end, I have to say personally, very personal opinion there, that I find the last one here a bit more, so the waiver one, a bit more readable, but you have to wrap your head around a bit to actually read it the way it's intended to. So yeah, I think that's a thing to grow in. So that's that. And now I mentioned caching multiple times without showing anything. So here now a slide a bit with some details on that. So in general, what we do there, or Resilience for J under the hood, is implementing or using only working against the JSR 107, or also called then JCache, which is in the end just an interface, which is then contains many, or not contains, but is then implemented by many, for example, also community projects. So for example, there is Caffeine as well as many others. You can then easily decide, depending on the dependencies that you add and also that you need to add, what you want to have as the actual implementation below. So then you can also configure it on the application level there. No assumptions on our side for that. And if you now want to use caching, as I mentioned earlier, that you have your resilience configuration as before, and this resilience configuration then also has a cache configuration method on there, which you can pass a cache configuration in. Here in this case, we then have a cache configuration which caches everything for 60 seconds. Yeah, right. And also mentioned here that we don't have any parameters. This is necessary. I will come to that in a second. And this configuration can then be used as before on the resilience decorator, so that we have our supplier again calculating the day of week that we, for whatever reason, want to cache. And with this configuration, the first call of this will actually calculate the value, and the second call, if done in the next 60 seconds, will return the exact same value as before without any calculations. So that's basically the cache behavior. Problem, or not problem, but point to be aware of, if you have some parameters in your call. So for example, what we see here below, we have a local date now with a specifically mentioned time zone. So that's a parameter to the method call that you want to have cached. Then you also need to add this to the cache configuration, as this is also part of the key in the end for which the cache works, or to which the returned value is cached. That's really a technical detail that you need to be aware of. but yeah, our API makes it rather obvious that you need to at least think about it. Yeah, so in the end, you have to say without parameters or with parameters. And in the end, this should make you think whether you have parameters in your cached method or supplier or not. And yeah, here again, also a word of caution, depending on the identifier that you passed into the resilience configuration, in this case, this service class. Any method that you make or that uses this same configuration also uses the same caches under the hood. Meaning, if you reuse this configuration then for some other point with the same parameters and everything, it might be that the cache then has some conflicts and you have can land in a mess in the end. So it would be advisable to, if you have a cache configuration, to be very cautious where you reuse this configuration in the end. Just again, word of caution there, but that's more or less inherent to caching in itself. Okay, that's it so far for resilience and caching. Now we get a bit more into the nitty-gritty details that many of you may not have seen yet, but should be at least noted down that there were some changes. So in the past, we had the so-called request context, which was basically always if you receive a request, from an HTTP request from a customer, then automatically by our SDK, this call was wrapped into a thread context, in a request context, and yeah, this was very heavily dependent on the servlet standard in general, which caused some problems if some dependencies were not where they should be. So to get rid of this and make it easier usable, we reworked it a bit and also renamed it. So it's no longer reliant on a request itself, but it's now called thread context. The behavior in itself is basically the same. It is still created on any request that you receive, but no longer directly references or relies on the servlet standard. So in the end, nothing changes there for you if you use the usual request approach. However, if you are in some scheduled, for example, context, or if you receive or use our message VDM, for example, then you don't have a concrete request that you retrieve, but and therefore you don't get this wrapping out of the box by the SDK. Then you have to do it yourself, and this would then look basically somewhat like this. So you would have the thread context executor. There you call the execute on. You also have the option to provide a request in here if you wanted to, or as a listener, basically you can pass in the request, and this will then automatically again handle everything. So if you for some reason have a request or an auth token, more on that in a second, you can pass it in here in this thread context executor, and this will wrap everything basically as if you would have requested a request, received a request. Also the same behavior with if thread context is already there and present, then it will be automatically inherited. So again, here we made everything a bit more lenient, that it not throws an exception directly, but we try to basically behave as you would expect the code to behave in the best case. So yeah, should be easier to use. And yeah, I already mentioned if you have some on Cloud Foundry, for example, some JOT from your XSUAA instance, then you could use the route via the thread context that I just showed you, or what we provided for convenience method. Many of our accessors now have some execute methods. So earlier they might be known as some on behalf of methods. They were now a bit more streamlined and tested and verified that it now works the way we see below. So assuming that you have, for example, assume that you have application receiving information via our message VDM, then you could pass as part of the message the JOT under which this message was created in the first place, and execute in this application then that received this JOT your code inside a block like this, like you see here. So you have your auth token accessor, and call on that execute with auth token. Then you just say, okay, never mind what I just had. I want to use the following auth token, and the block afterwards, so the supplier that you have here, will then be executed with this auth token in mind. So in the end, yeah, that's really convenient wrapping mechanism there. which is also there for the tenants, principal, and request. The same can also be if you, another approach idea would be you are not sure whether in your current context, whether you have a principal or not. So principal is now, principal is now our general abstraction of a user. And if you're not aware or don't know whether you have a principal right now or not, then you have the possibility to use our execute with fallback method, which receives still a principal in this case. And then you can be sure that in the block afterwards, you are either using the one that you have currently available, if there is any, or you use this default principal in that case. So you can be sure inside the block that you anyway have a principal available. Okay, and yeah, the other details basically of the, or a rough overview of the details that could be relevant for you is that we no longer use those environment variables that you see above or in the first line, meaning that, yeah, basically our step in the direction of being, that it just works with the SDK is that we see whether a tenant is available or not, or a user was available, now a principal, or not. So yeah, you don't need to tell it to us, but we just work the way we are given a tenant or a user. So basically, in the end, yeah, we don't use those, or we don't read those environment variables anymore. Then, as mentioned before, option and try are now used all over the SDK to show whether a value might be null or not. So then it's wrapped in an option, or to improve exception handling. There we, in many points, still have one version called get something, which throws an exception, and try get something, which then returns a try object and will not throw an exception. The behavior under the hood is still the same. It's just how you want to handle the exceptions in the end. Yeah, right here, as mentioned before, user is now more general a principal, so a minor change there. Then also, if you used it, the cloud logger factory is now removed. That was something that we introduced in the past that we removed, and you should use now from SLF4J, the standard logger factory. From the API, nothing has changed. It's just the call in your, the static instantiation of your logger just changes. The API under that is still exactly the same. Then we, as I said earlier, we removed many code or many stuff from our deprecated stuff from our repository, especially also the BAPI VDM. But this doesn't mean, or we still kept our the BAPI query in general, so you can still create your custom queries as you did before, but just the BAPI VDM, so the wrapper around it is now gone. And yeah, more or less on the for interest side, we no longer provide a Tomcat archetype. So for Cloud Foundry, we only have the Tommy and Spring archetypes from version 3 on. So that's it to that. And with that, I will give back, as I mentioned earlier, to Alex, who will now go through an example migration and show you how this can be done directly in code.
Okay, cool. So now I'm having the fun of migrating everything. But first, let's look at the general practice of how to do so. There are several steps involved to get an application using Cloud SDK 2 to version 3. So first, you see I will update the Maven dependencies, and this will give us the easiest approach to include the new classes. My commands have been made obsolete, as Christoph has showed us, so we need to migrate those classes as well. And we will have the honor of introducing the destination handling, which was introduced with the new version, and which needs to be done now for AV application. And now then let's see whether the tests and deprecated type references can be updated as well. Okay, so you may have worked on the first step example in the past. So this is like a very simple application to showcase the basic functionality of Cloud SDK. There's a blog post series as well as a SAP tutorial, and let's take the opportunity to use our first step example and migrate it. So I have prepared a little project here. This is the example for the first application. We're having the Tommy. We have created a project from the Tommy archetype for Cloud Foundry, as well as some business partner servlet, which gets us 10 entries from the OData business partner service as a call. So what you see here now is the usage of the OData VDM, which we have provided. So you're probably very familiar with the business partner service. Yeah, it's the fluent API style of programming, and it's very nice. But this is not very. It's not difficult enough. Let's make this more. Let's introduce the command as well, because this call is just a basic call. It's for every GET request on the business partner endpoint, this VDM call will be executed. So here we have no form of resilience or caching. Let's see how the same thing looks like with commands. So I created the class get business partner command. This is the approach for Cloud SDK 2 still, just to get you here. And there's a limit parameter as well. Yeah. Okay, but it's still not enough. Let's make this cached, because we don't want to execute this VDM call every time there is a request going in. Let's see how this looks like. For the version 2 of the Cloud SDK, we needed to inherit from the caching ERP command. And this command type requires us to define a get cache method, as well as a command cache key to override the key configuration. In this case, we want to provide the limit as part of the cache key as well, because obviously each call with a different limit may change the result. Okay, now I think that's difficult enough. Let's see how to migrate this. So what we see, it's the program for Cloud SDK 2, the first step example, and let's get started with the root POM file. What we see here is the dependency management. If you work the tutorials, you know that it references all transitive and explicit dependency versions. Now, the easiest way to start here is just replacing the version 2.21 to something new. Let's say 2.3.1. So, and this wasn't all, because Christoph has already mentioned the not only artifact and not only the versions have changed, but also the group ID. So we have to update the S/4HANA group ID as well to Cloud SDK. So what's now happening? Probably IDE will run and make some checks. Probably some dependencies will not be found because of the renaming. Let's see. For the application POM. So there are two dependencies which need to be updated. It's not S/4HANA Cloud Platform anymore, it's SDK Platform. And it's SDK.S/4HANA all. Okay. So the second dependency is to provide all OData VDM functionalities, and the first one is everything Cloud Foundry related methods. Okay, and let's see how our IntelliJ reacts. Okay, it's waiting, no problem. Now what we have seen that the caching ERP command will be marked as not available. So we want to have this to still keep the command class, but let's make it not inherit from the caching ERP command. Instead, it's a flat class, and we won't need the constructor call to the original histories command anymore. Okay, and we don't need the cache anymore because we're doing this now directly, as well as the command cache key. Okay, let's still keep the run cacheable, But what's now missing, obviously, is the execute method, because what we see is from the business partner servlet. Oh, now it's catching up. You will see that the execute method is not provided. Let's create it. Public execute. And now give it a return type. It's a list of business partners. And then let's see. So we have a, we want to use the resilience decorator. Okay, just a second. Sorry. For some reason, IntelliJ is not wanting me to use the Java JDK. That's great. Okay, now let's just continue. Resilience decorator. Okay. Okay, let's just not use 3.1, maybe 3.2, we are happier. And let's continue. So we have the resilience decorator. Let's assume we take the callable. Okay. Let's initialize a variable called call. And then let's decorate this call. And for the lambda to choose here, let's take the run cacheable method. This is like the notation for Java 8, this run cacheable. And we need some configuration. So, okay. So that's not all, because we want to also return this. And this can be done by return call. Let's give it a better name. Okay, you will see that if you run call on a callable, you are expected to handle an exception. And this is where things get a bit difficult, because originally our command classes were not expecting to give exceptions on an execute method. And the past histories was just wrapping those exceptions which were thrown in part of a runtime exception. And this is what we are required to do here now as well. But we will find a way around this in a second. Okay. All right. So what's left is the configuration. And this can be done. Let's make it not an internal variable, but rather a class member. What we need is a resilience configuration. Let's take the get business partner command as identifier, because it's the only action which is operated by this class. That's fine for us. And then this would be fine, but we want to also include caching. So let's add cache configuration and make it, well, let's say 60 seconds. And this time we have to decide whether it is a cache with parameters or without parameters. This operation requires us to provide a parameter, and in this case it is limit, because the return is the return information is heavily dependent on this parameter. Okay, good, almost done. That looks good already. So Now what we will see is the older VDM has changed in a way that you cannot simply run execute because it would expect you, or in version 2 it was expected that there is a default destination which is called ERP query endpoint. We want to make this explicit. So this time we have to decide what kind of destination needs to be provided. Okay, let's make it a destination. We have seen the destination accessor already. Let's use it. Let's make it ERP some endpoint. You can put anything inside as long as it is referenced somewhere. So destination. All right, this would be enough already, but as Christoph has told us, we cannot only just throw in a destination, but we need some kind of HTTP destination. So as you imagine, those are the methods provided. Let's run as HTTP. And this already is a totally fine command class with little import difficulties here. And this can already be used now in production. It is now resilient. It has the caching with explicit cache configuration and a destination which is explicitly defined. So no implicit behavior, no unexpected behavior. It's everything can be changed and especially debugged. It's fine. Okay. Now what's missing is the servlet. But since the general approach hasn't really changed much, it's the same. It's all fine. Okay. Now, just using the try and catch could be fine, but we, as the Cloud SDK developers, we really want to advertise the waiver usage because it gives you better exception control. So you're not required to use the try and catch, but you can have a more it's an easier way to look at this. You have already seen the try of callable. And instead of returning the list business partner, we can return a try of list business partner. And what this now looks like is this method. So let's call it a maybe business partner. So be aware that no exception is thrown here, so we don't really need the try block. Let's instead make it an if block. We can ask whether this method was successful, and if it was not successful, we can just use the same behavior. So git cause. So, okay, now the block is fixed and everything's fine. Okay. Git cause. Okay, now what you see is the very same example, just using the waiver way of doing the try resolution. And now you have, that's already it. You have a fully functional version of the first application with using the newest version of Cloud SDK, version 3. There are slightly more adjustments with the tests, but you will find them in the linked blog posts and migration guides, and also the nice little practice to do this yourself, but it's very easy to understand. So you have a table and a list of before and after the replacement operation. So it's easy. It's easy. So what you have seen is I was just updating the Maven POM dependency management entry and updated the group IDs, and that's essentially it for using the new functionality of Cloud SDK 3. Also, there's a little conclusion here. So you've seen it's easy enough. It can be done rather quickly, and for me personally, the greatest point is there's no implicit behavior anymore. Everything is done explicitly. So especially for the destination, it's a great step up. Yeah. Also with the new JDK 8, we are free to use the modern style of programming. So we have Lambda notations and fluent APIs. Yeah. Okay, this is also the conclusion of this presentation. And we would like to have you to pose your questions, and maybe we can have a little discussion. Now it's the time to give us your feedback, if you like.
So in case you want to speak, you have a raise your hand feature in the panel, or you can use the chat or post your questions in the Q&A interface. Okay. Okay. Alex, do you see the chat?
Yes, I see the chat.
Okay.
Okay, so are there any tutorials for this example? We have the migration guide, and I'm afraid there's a very easy example for the first app. It's not available online yet, but you will find a more elaborate example for the demo project for the address book manager. It's in our public GitHub repository, and yeah, there you can find the diffs, the git diffs, and everything which needs to be done. Yeah. Well, do we have a link? So
We will be live.
can I implement this example in SAP Cloud trial account? Yes, you can. Yeah. If you like, you can send you the project directly. You can just deploy it there and have a go with it. Yeah.
Great. So it seems that we don't have any further questions. So I would like to thank you for this great and the presentation link and the recording will be posted in the SAP Community Calls page in the SAP Community site. So that's the question we got in chat.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I will stop the recording. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.